What's your "tis but a scratch" moment? Story 1. I was mountain biking and fell off. I fell down part of the mountain and into a road where I almost got hit by a car. I got up quickly, thanked the driver for not me, and then got back on the bike. I knew the road would meet up with the trail I was on so I could meet up with my group who hadn't seen me fall. When I got to them, one of them looked at me and was like, "What happened?" I got off the bike, walked over whilst we waited for the others to catch up, and just said I fell off. He then looked down at me and was like, "What the hell happened?" I'm like, "It's nothing. A few cuts and scratches on my hands and arms, my leg was bleeding from earlier, and that was it." Then I looked down and realized I had roughed up my skin and my leg from falling on the road. Basically a bad case of road burn. From all the adrenaline, I hadn't even felt it. They called someone to come and get me from the mountains. I wasn't allowed to continue. One of the other riders saw my leg and decided they wanted to stop too. I just went to a pharmacy, grabbed some wipes and bandages, then we got a drink whilst we waited for everyone else to finish. Skin is for the weak. Story 2. A few years ago, I was sick. Not fun, but it was only a bug. I'd be okay in a couple of days max. I started to get an unusual pain in my abdomen as the day wore on, but to me, it was just a side effect of all the throwing up I'd been doing. I spent the night in the spare room for 2 reasons. 1, because I was so freaking hot, and 2, in case I needed to get up, I didn't disturb my partner who would be getting up early for work. I managed to get an okay night of sleep with the vomiting stopped, but I still felt bad. When my partner came to see me before he went to work, he asked how I was. I still felt terrible, but it was a tummy bug. I wasn't going to be instantly better, but that sharp pain was still there. On hearing that I was still in pain, he insisted on taking me to the hospital. I didn't think it was at all necessary, but I was too exhausted to argue. When we got to the hospital, I made sure the person at the front desk knew I thought it was a waste of time. After a lot of prodding and questions about if I was pregnant, it turned out it was my appendix in the process of rupturing. Story 3. I am a bartender in a nightclub. One night while working, I was pouring a drink while I reached back with my other hand to open a fridge. That's when I heard a pop and got a huge pain in my back and shoulder area. The pain was pretty bad, but I was sure it was a pulled muscle and there wouldn't be much point in seeing a doctor other than getting meds. So I waited and fought through the pain, which was so bad at times it was making it hard to breathe. That was a Friday. I called off Saturday and had Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday off before I went back to work Wednesday. Once I biked into work. All in all, I waited 9 days total before finally deciding to go to the emergency room. I had a collapsed lung called a spontaneous pneumothorax, and 20 minutes after getting to the ER, I was put into emergency surgery. I was essentially breathing with only one lung, and any major impact in my chest would have collapsed the other and probably killed me. Story 4. My little sister fell down about 15 steps at our grandma's house when she was a toddler. She got up, giggled, and went to go eat some snacks. This other time, still a toddler, she was supposed to be napping. We were in the living room and heard a huge thud. We ran to the room thinking she'd fallen out of bed. Nope, she somehow managed to pull the TV down. This was the early 2000s and TVs were heavy, and it fell on top of her. She was laying there in a snow angel position and my mom freaked out. When we got the TV off her, she got up and asked for ice. Not to soothe the pain, but to eat. My little sister was and still is a champ. Story 5. A couple of weeks ago, I stepped on an anthill and got a bunch of ant bites on my ankles. 3 to 4 days later, the itching was unbearable. I wasn't sleeping, my legs were swollen, and no amount of Benadryl or antihistamine cream was helping the itching. I finally went to a clinic to get a shot or whatever because I clearly was having some sort of allergic reaction. It was a staph infection that had spread from my ankles up to my knees. I would have died if this were in 1920 instead of 2020. I was on antibiotics for 10 days, and now several weeks later, the dead skin from the infection is still flaking off. Story 6. I got hit by a car during my freshman year of high school. I went flying and lost consciousness for a split second when I hit the ground. Thank God for the helmet. When I came to mind, people were all around me asking if I was okay, what happened, etc. I was like, oh yeah, I'm good. I'm just gonna get back on my bike and go now. But didn't really move. And people started asking me to call an ambulance and my mom, etc. I was like, why? I'm good. I even told my mom on the phone I was still gonna bike home. But as I was saying that, the people around me had started to move one of my legs and I watched as my foot proceeded to not move. I had broken my leg. Just pure adrenaline and shock. I also vividly remember thinking, so this is what it feels like to get hit by a car. Also, the leg wasn't setting right, probably from movement, and the doctor decided to put me on laughing gas as he tried to crack my bones back into place. I was in a stupor laughing. Story 7. One of my students. I had impressed upon them that there would be no late work unless hooked up to tubes in the hospital. It was their research paper final, pre-digital submission days. A college freshman had been given a ridiculously fast car by parents who'd also chosen a ridiculous acid green color. His car stood out. Another kid in class said on his way to class he saw the ridiculous car smashed in an ambulance at the side of the road. He stops and approaches. The child owner of the ridiculous scar is being loaded into an ambulance on a stretcher and sees the other student. Yells, "My research paper! Front seat! Get it to her!" He did so and submitted the blood-smudged, bedraggled document. The dude comes to pick it up a week and a half later, in a wheelchair, because he broke one leg, sprained the other ankle, and sprained a wrist. He has been, for 20 years, my gold standard. Story 8. Rolled my car. Got out of the car bewildered and in shock, noticing a kink in my neck. As someone who constantly cracks my knuckles, back, and neck, my instinct was just, I'm not hurt, thank God. Just need to crack my neck and I'll be fine. Before I finished processing that train of thought, I was held out in C-spine by the person behind me who had watched my crash. Luckily, he was an off-duty firefighter. I had broken 3 vertebrae in my neck. I just couldn't tell it yet from the adrenaline and shock. Required full surgery to fuse together with bone from my hip and plates and screws. Had there not been someone behind me and had I proceeded with my "tis but a scratch" instincts, I'd be paralyzed or dead. Story 9. When I was in elementary school, we used to play this game at recess where we would try and see how many people we could fit in the tube slide without the person at the bottom falling out. When it came to be my turn to be the person at the bottom, I thought I was being smart by bracing my hands against the walls of the slides. The next kid came sliding down and his foot hit the perfect spot in my hand and dislocated my thumb at the second joint. Other kids laughed that I could only hold one kid in when I held my hand up and smiled and said, "Watch how fast I can make my thumb grow," and pulled it back into place with a loud pop. One of the kids freaked out and told me, and I got sent home for the day, but I felt like the coolest 4th grader there ever was for not freaking out when my bone wasn't where it should have been. Story 10. When I was 10, I was a gymnast, and we were practicing a bunch of tumbling passes for a show we were putting on for kids in a summer camp who were coming to use our gym one day. For the show, we had the lights down and we were only using a spotlight. Well, one of the girls did a tumbling pass and landed weirdly. She got up and hobbled to the back of the line when it was her turn again. She tried to run and immediately fell and got up and tried again. The same thing happened. Then the poor girl behind her casually said, "I think your leg is broken." The lights came on, and sure enough, the girl's leg was all messed up. She didn't realize it and had still been trying to tumble, but her leg just simply didn't work. Story 11. When I was in 7th grade, I slept over at a friend's place, and early that morning we went to go run my paper route, with a plan that afterward we would get freshly baked donuts from the nearby grocery store and then go back and play Mario Kart all morning. On the way back to the grocery store, I had some black ice on my bike, locked up the brakes, and flipped over the handlebars when the tires hit dry cement again. I face planted into the street and had gravel in my mouth and a cut in my right palm. I brushed it off, we got donuts, and played SNES, although I couldn't hold the controller with my right hand, so I kinda just twiddled my fingers over the buttons. Later, we made chocolate chip waffles and went back to SNES. When my mom came to pick me up around noon, my wrist was swollen to 3 times its normal size, and I could barely move my hand. She took me to the ER where we discovered it was broken. I just dealt with it all morning because Nintendo. Story 12. When I was younger, I had an issue with my knee where it would lock up, essentially dislocating it in a minor way. The first time it happened, I was snowboarding. I fell face forward, and when I tried to straighten my leg, it was incredibly painful. I sat on hands and knees for a couple of minutes, then decided that I had no other option. Gritted my teeth and strained my leg. There was a loud pop, a very notable shifting of bones, and quite the feeling of crepitus, but 2 seconds later I was continuing down the hill and forgetting about it. Well, it happened again, repeatedly, and every time I would just pop my knee back into place and keep going. It really freaked out people when it happened during soccer games. One time it even happened while having some freaky time. Fortunately, she had seen me pop it back before, so she wasn't as freaked out. Eventually, I had surgery and found out that I had torn my lateral meniscus, cartilage in the knee, and a flap was lodging itself between the bones. Also, when younger, I hurt my ankle jumping off a big snow mound, which was strictly prohibited by school. I figured it was just sprained, and while it hurt, I hobbled around for a while. Even played 2 soccer games on it with a significant amount of ace bandage securing it. Eventually, it wasn't getting better, so I told Mom. I had a fracture about halfway through the distal end of my tibia. Who knows how small it was when it first happened, but definitely made it worse by waiting. Lastly, just a couple of years ago, I was chasing my daughter at the playground and ducked down under a chest-level platform while following her, came back up on the other side and ran full speed into a hand railing with my face. As usual for head injuries, my daughter, about 6 at the time, started to freak out for a second, then realized that I was totally calm. Walked to my parents' house right down the road, grabbed some tissues, and drove to the emergency room. I had a comminuted fracture of the front face of my nose, meaning it was broken into about 4 smaller pieces, and at least 1 other fracture back in my sinuses. All the playgrounds say parental supervision required. I didn't realize it was the parents that needed to be supervised. Story 13. A metal canteen full of poker chips weighing something like 10 to 15 kilograms fell on my head from the top shelf of the closet. I dropped on the ground and blacked out for about a second. Then I was like, Ouch, that was a nice bonk, but I was ready to shake it off and stand up. Then I noticed my wife's face frozen in fear, watching me from the next room. I wanted to reassure her by smiling and gently scrubbing the impact point in my forehead to demonstrate that I was fine. That's when I noticed I had a big cut in my forehead. Took a trip to the emergency room. Thankfully, it was just a light concussion and a superficial wound. But my poor wife will remember that for some time. Curiously, I didn't feel any pain at any moment, even several hours after the initial shock. Story 14. When I was 14, I was sitting outside my house at boarding school when 3 teenagers came by looking for a posh kid to beat up. I, being dumb, didn't see them coming. I, being unathletic, decided that running would just get them excited and decided to talk my way out of it. It was going pretty well. They made threats and threw insults. I pretended not to understand. The fight they were hoping for was failing to start, until one of them got bored and said, "I'd hit you if you weren't wearing glasses," and yanked my glasses off, threw them aside, and punched me hard in the face. It was a beautiful punch. I felt something weird from the upper left canine upon impact. No pain. That came later. Just the instant realization that it was it. The violence had started. They didn't have any reason to stop. So I reached into my mouth, pulled out my canine, held it up, and said cheerfully, "Wow, I lost a tooth. I never lost a tooth like that before." The pause was as I realized that I had lost my baby teeth. I was very conscientious about lying. I couldn't see the looks on their faces, no glasses, but the sounds that they made can only be described as disappointment and disgust. They then turned and walked away. I found my glasses and then went to show everyone my tooth. Story 15. I was working in a landscaping job putting in a French drain for my water mitigation. I was standing in the ditch and reached for a tool as the backhoe operator turned in my direction. He stopped, but the momentum bucked against the hydraulics, and I took a glancing shot from a bucket tooth right in the top of my head. One of my coworkers took me to the doctor's office where my parents worked. I got into a room with the doctor and he tells me, "You need stitches. I can't do anything with this." I said, "Doc, my band has a gig later and I can't wait around in the emergency room all night. I gotta do something." I held my scalp together while he reluctantly shaved around the cut with 79-cent Bic and superglued and butterfly bandaged my head back together. I put on a hat and we blew the doors off the gig that night. You can still see the scar when I shaved my head. Story 16. Last year I was hit by a car. My fault for walking past a parked bus without looking first. I flew a good 2 to 3 meters, picked myself up, grabbed my cap and my glasses, and walked to the side of the road. The kid that was driving drove up to the sideway and got out to check if I was okay. I told him that everything was fine. Surprisingly enough, it didn't even hurt. It must have been lucky. Told him to drive off as his car wasn't dented either, and we decided that everything was fine, and asks if he should call an ambulance. "What for?" I ask. And he tells me that they should at least look at my arm. Lo and behold, my entire shirt was ripped and my arm was covered in gravel and blood. Don't worry, it doesn't hurt, so it must be a minor injury. As I said that, I find myself unable to stand and just sit straight down on the ground. At this point, I realized that my left leg wasn't working properly, so I decided to call an ambulance after all. They send one over and it passes me. I decided to get up and chase it, just to realize that I am unable to stand. One ambulance ride, angry girlfriend, worried friends, and rectal probing. Did not expect that one. It turned out to be 4 cracked ribs, 1 concussion, torn muscles, several lacerations, and 1 nasty crack in my hip. And I thought I was fine. Adrenaline is one hell of a drug. Story 17. I was hanging outside of this pizza place when I was 17. A random place where teenagers go to hang out. They just stand outside. But me and my 4 other friends decided to do that one day. Anyway, we saw 3 cute girls. And there was this one with blonde hair with black highlights, blue eyes, and I liked her. She had a nice body too, and was blushing when I talked to her, so I thought I had it in the bag. Anyway, the boys there and my friends were running up the side of the pizza place. It wasn't a tall building, and onto the roof. So I decided that I want to impress this cute girl, so I say to her, "Hey yo, watch this." I ran up the pretty easy wall, but that wasn't the issue. I was at the top and tried to grab the roof, but fell miserably, and I was going backward. Felt like it was slow motion, but I managed to get my arms out straight and land on my hands like a handstand. Then I fell onto my side. It kinda hurt my wrist, but nothing else was hurting. Immediately, that girl runs over and asks if I'm okay. And although the care she was giving to me felt good, I also felt so humiliated that I embarrassed myself and just wanted to leave at that point. Anyway, she helps me stand up and she asks if I'm okay, and I say, "Yeah, I'm fine. I couldn't even feel it." And I fake giggled. The girl also fake giggled and said, "Yeah, but your leg is blue." So I'm like, "Huh?" And I look down and see it dripping from my right leg. I did kind of feel my right leg hit something when I fell, but it didn't hurt. At this point, I just felt even more humiliated because I was trying to play it cool to impress her. She then says, "That's a lot of blood. You should go fix yourself up or it's going to keep coming." Without thinking, I then said, "Yeah, you keep me coming," and giggled. Then realized what I said could be either interpreted as something dirty or just embarrassing. She responded with a, and walked to her friends. I walked away with mine and turned my head to look at her. She was still looking at me, so I slightly bit my lip and winked at her. Then tripped over nothing and grazed my knee. Yeah, I learned my lesson.
If you enjoyed this video, make sure to check out this next video. The YouTube algorithm really thinks you like it.